This is going to be our AP Computer Science A Unit 5 video. I'm Meek, and I'm going to be teaching this class way better than all your teachers can. We're going to be covering everything you need to know about Unit 5, tips, tricks, etc. Specifically, we're going to be going into the anatomy of a class, the syntax associated with it. We're going to be writing our own classes today. Okay, we've been experimenting with classes that have already been written for us, like the math class, the string class, the scanner class. And now we're going to learn how to write classes of our own. Okay, there is an entire FRQ on the AP CSA exam that is literally write a class. So that's what we're going to be getting into today. So let's move right in. Okay, so first and foremost, when we write a class, we need to understand what a class is in the computer perspective. Okay, so you see here my file here, example.java, and this file contains what we call the main method. Main method being this line of code right here, the public static void main string args. This is effectively telling the computer that this is the file where I'm going to be executing the code. This is the file where I'm going to write all my for loops, my system.out.print, all of the code that the computer is executing and running. Okay? Whereas the class file, which is a separate file that we write, is not a file in which code is executed, is a file in which data is stored. It is a file in which code is stored. When we call the scanner class or the math class, code is pulled from the class file, and it's pulled from the class file, and we bring it into the file containing the main method. Okay, and we execute it in the main method file. At the very top of my page, we declare the class. Public class example. Okay? If you're doing this on a computer and you're not just bearing with me in your head, then it is important to note that the name of your class must always match the name of your file. Okay? Or else it won't run. So here I have public class example. This is the standard initiator that we use to open a class. It starts with an open parenthesis, ends with a closed parenthesis. This is the starter code that has already been on my screen for every video thus far. But it is important to note that this starter code will not be given to you on any of your exams. You're going to need to know how to write this starter code in your main method file, which is the file that executes your code, as I've said, or when we're writing our class. So let me write a class for you guys. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to File and I'm going to create a new file, because like I said before, the class can only exist in a new file. Let's call this the sheep class. Let me use a lowercase s, sheep.java. It's also important to note that you need to use .java if you're on a computer. So I just created a new file. It's right here. I'm going to declare it as public class sheep to match my name, and I'm going to use the open parenthesis. Now, there are important components to a class. First of all, you have characteristics. If you aren't aware with the sheep example that I used in the first video when I discussed object-oriented programming, I suggest you go refresh your memory on that because I'm going to be referencing that example in this video a lot. So, you'll remember that I discussed that a sheep, the class sheep, has attributes, has characteristics, and it has actions. So whenever we write a class, again, the class is the general framework and the object is the particular embodiment. Okay? So I'm going to start with the characteristics of a sheep. A sheep has a color. So in order to write its color, to designate that it has a color, I'm going to designate its attribute or its instance variable, that's the words we're going to use for it, private string color. And I'm just going to terminate that with a semicolon. Okay? Why did I start with private? Okay? The reason we use the word private is because the only program, the only file that is able to access the attributes, that is able to access the characteristics of an object, is going to be the class file. A private designation means that only the file that it is designated in can access it. Meaning the main method, which is a different file, cannot access private instance variables, cannot access the attributes of the object. Okay? And we're going to discuss methods that work around that. What else does a sheep have in Minecraft? A sheep has HP, private int HP. What else does a sheep have? Just for the sake of it, let's say it has a height, private double height. Okay, and now we have some attributes. We have some characteristics of a sheep, some instance variables. From there, I'm going to write a constructor. A constructor, as we've seen in the scanner class, is a method that you call to create an object of the class. Okay? Now usually, a class has a default constructor. A default constructor is a constructor that is called if you do not pass any variables into the parameters of the constructor. So let me demonstrate that here in the main method. If I wanted to create a sheep object, what I would do is I would say sheep ex equals new sheep with the constructor right there. Okay, now you'll notice that in my program I didn't write any constructor. So when I execute this code, when the code calls a constructor like this, a default constructor will be used. What is a default constructor? A constructor that initializes all of the instance variables to their default values. Okay? What's happening behind the scenes when you call a constructor is a constructor designates, it instantiates an object, and it says, okay, I now have a sheep object, and that sheep object has this color, this HP, and this height. That's all the constructor does. It just sets the values of the attributes. Okay? In the case of the default constructor, it sets those values to their default values. The default value for any object is null. Therefore, string is not going to be the empty string, it's going to be null. Okay? The default value for an int is 0. The default value for a double is 0.0. So if I were to call the default constructor like this, I would end up with a sheep object that has a null color, 0 HP, and 0.0 height. You can rewrite the default constructor. How do you rewrite the default constructor? You write a constructor method with no parameters. That is how you write a constructor method. Okay? Inside your parentheses, you would have had to designate parameters. But in this case, we didn't designate parameters. So therefore, this designation overrides the default constructor. So whenever this constructor is called with no parameters in it, it's going to refer to this constructor that I'm writing right now. And in this constructor, we're going to declare that the color is white. Well, I need to put it as the string literal, of course. I'm going to declare that the HP is 20. And I'm going to declare that the height is 0.9. Okay? And that's all you need to do to write a constructor. The constructor has the name of the class, the public before it, and the parameters that you pass in. In this case, we didn't write any parameters. And then, inside the constructor, you're going to designate values to all of your instance variables. Now, let's write an actually useful constructor that instantiates the object to have instance variables that we want. Okay? So as for the parameters that I'm going to pass into my constructor, the first parameter I'm going to need is a string, and I'm going to designate that as C for color. Then I'm going to need an integer, and I'm going to designate that as H for HP. And then I'm going to need a double, and I'm going to designate that as H for height. Okay? Then I'm going to write my constructor as the color equals C, the value I passed into the parameter. I'm going to designate that my HP is equal to H, the value I passed in as a parameter, and that my height is equal to lowercase h, the value that I passed into the parameter. So in this case, I can actually go into my main method and dictate what kind of sheep object I wanted to create. I wanted to create a sheep that is the color pink. I wanted to create a sheep that has 10 HP with a height of 20 meters, or whatever, 20.0. Okay. Now I have created a sheep that has the attributes I want it to have. But both of these constructors have the same name, so how does the computer differentiate between which one to use? It differentiates using the parameters I passed in. Okay, the computer says, hey, I need a constructor that takes a string, an integer, and a double in that order. Let me look at my constructors. I have one constructor that doesn't take any parameters, and I have one constructor that takes a string, an integer, and a double in that order, so I'm going to use that one. So also in the sheep example that I mentioned to us in the first video, I referenced that the sheep has behaviors. In this case, we call them methods. Okay? Maybe I can write a method of the sheep where it eats grass. Maybe it can do that. So what am I going to call that? That's going to be a method. If the sheep eats grass, do I need it to return anything? So no, it's going to be a void method, because the method isn't going to return anything to the main method. It's also going to do the action on a particular object, so it's not a static method. So I'm going to do public void eat, and I'm going to write my method like this. Okay? So if the sheep is eating, what's it going to do? It's probably going to grow. So I'm going to say that height plus equals 0.1. Okay? And basically what I'm saying here is I'm saying that when the eat method is called, when the sheep eats, it grows 0.1 meter in height. Okay, I know I keep using the word meters, it's just habit. It doesn't mean anything. I didn't designate anything as meters in the code. It grows by 0.1. I'm going to forget using units to make it easier to understand. Okay? So, when the sheep eats, it grows by 0.1. So, how would I reference that? I would do ex.eat, just like that. And I would call the method like this, and that makes my sheep grow by 0.1. Okay? Also, we can add accessor methods, methods that access the data that are in the private instance variables. So if I want to access these private instance variables in the main method, I'm going to need to write a method in my sheep class in order to do that. So public string, because I want it to return a string. And what am I going to title this? I'm going to title it get color. Public string get color, and I'm going to say return the color value. So when you're writing methods with return types that return a certain value, you need to write this set of code to dictate what the method is to return. Okay? What do I want it to return? I want it to return the color instance variable. An important thing to note is that whenever the computer sees or reads the return command, it ends the execution of the method. So if I write after this system.out.print something, print 0, this code will never get executed because the execution of the method stops the moment we return something. Okay, something to keep in mind. Now, this is also a great time to discuss the domain and scope of our variables. Okay, so what do I mean by that? If I were to create a new string inside my method with the same name, color, and I were to declare it as the empty string, the computer would allow me to do this because these two variables are in different scopes. One is created inside the method, one is created outside the method. Okay? So, if I reference the word color inside my method, it's going to only get the color variable declared inside the method. Okay? So if I ask it to return color, it's going to return the empty string, the double quotes right here. Okay? If I delete this, the computer can no longer find a color variable inside the method, so then it expands its scope to search for a color outside the method, in which case it encounters the instance variable that we are trying to get it to return. Another thing to note is that if you create a variable inside a method, the second that that method finishes executing, this code, this variable, gets deleted. Okay? If I create this string inside the method, it gets deleted the moment the method finishes executing. Okay? So we're going to delete this and we're going to continue writing. What did I just do? So I'm going to write a bunch of other methods like this that will return the instance variables for the other two that we have. Return HP. And then once again for height. One very important type of accessor method is the toString method. Okay? So, like I said before, if I go into my main method and I want to system.out.println, if I system.out.println my sheep object, ex, by itself, this will just output the object reference. It's just going to output the treasure map. It's just going to output a bunch of numbers. The treasure map, the location of the object. Okay? Now, that's not actually what happens because the class comes with a default toString method. Okay? The default toString method is called whenever the system.out.print is called with the object. What the toString method does is it takes the instance variables of the class, or excuse me, the instance variables declared in the object, and it prints those instead of printing the treasure map. It prints out the instance variables. Okay? Now that's the default toString method. You are able to redefine the toString method if you so choose. So let me redefine it as such. Public string toString. The spelling here is very important. Public string toString, and I'm going to say return the sheep is plus color. Okay? So in this case, I rewrote my toString method to just print out, instead of pink 20.9, it's going to print out the sheep is pink. And that's what the terminal is going to print out when I call the toString. In fact, let me demonstrate that. So errors I made here were I hastily copy-pasted this down and I didn't change the return type. The HP is supposed to be an int return type, the height is supposed to be a double return type. Now, when I compile and run, I need to be in the main method to compile and run, and I just get out the sheep is pink. So I redefined my toString method, and that's what it printed out when I printed it out like this. So again, you can write methods that do pretty much anything you want. Okay, we're just covering the general types of methods. You have accessor methods, which access data and return it to the main method. You have the toString method, which is called whenever you try and print something out. And you have the final type of method, general type. Again, you can use your imagination to create whatever you want, which is the mutator method, which is a method you call to change instance variables. So public, this isn't going to return anything, so it's going to be a void method. Public void change color. And since this is going to be a change color, we need to know what to change it to. How are we going to know what to change it to? Well, we're going to call that in as a parameter. So string C is going to be our parameter. And we're going to redeclare our instance variable color equals C. And I can call ex.changeColor. And I'm going to change the color to black. That's clack. I'm going to change the color to black. And then I am going to print that out to the user again. So I can compile and run. The sheep is pink, now the sheep is black. There you go. So that's pretty much everything we've got. Again, join the Discord server if you need extra help. Enjoy your life fully and completely. Thank you.